you know, to suffocate women in leadership. But they proposed such recommendations in the Pan-African Parliament. I mean, really, it is quite ironical. A country, because I really need to respect our neighborhood, but there are countries that are known to suffocate women in leadership. They also proposed the matters to do with the women's rights, which again, in my opinion, cannot really be practical when they are proposed by quotas that are known not to respect women in leadership. But all said and done, there is need for African countries, Honorable Speaker, to review their treaties and their engagements. We are a continent that is too small, but very rich. We are a continent that if we really decide to join hands, Honorable Speaker, if we decide to, you know, create common grounds in terms of our engagements, we can form a very enviable continent. It is sad, in the United States of America, Honorable Speaker, it's really a country. But moving from here, let's say, when one takes a flight from, let's say, Texas to Seattle, Washington, it takes a person about 8 hours flight to get to that place. But it's still regarded as a single country. And people are able to engage from those member states. You know, they've been able to turn such a huge and populous country into one very small global village. There is need for African countries to review that and stop this fear, unnecessary fear, amongst the member states, the fear of unknown, people trying to fight to remain in leadership all through in their life, you know, because the member states have also leaders that do not want to change. They do not want to have review of their own laws. Somebody wants to be in power forever. Somebody wants to remain in power they believe that they enjoy the monopoly of leadership. And that is why they don't believe that somebody can be able to take over the leadership. So it is actually sad at times as Africans that we really cannot reason together and even come up with a common currency. Those are the things that this Pan-African Parliament should be thinking of. And if it needs us to suffrage the membership, as far as the nominees are concerned, maybe not even be able to sit in the National Assembly so that they can have quality time to legislate and come up with laws that can be able to put this continent together, then so be it. But unfortunately, Honorable Speaker, we do not want to agree that as a continent, we are too few and we can come together. The member states can come together, form a common ground so that we actually become a continent that can be able to reason together. It is sad that a student leaves Uganda. A student leaves Uganda and comes to Kenya, you know, leaves Uganda and comes to Kenya and pays school fees as an international student. It is very sad. Yet, Uganda is just here. But a student leaves Texas and goes to Seattle, Washington, 8 hours apart, and is able to study there comfortably. So, Honorable Speaker, with those very many remarks, I support the report. Thank you.
Honorable Soro, were you rushing against time or you're done?
I was actually...
Because of status, I could add you a few minutes.
Please add me 3 minutes.
Add Honorable Soro 3 minutes.
Please, thank you very much.
And it will be followed by Honorable Irene Mayaka and the others who have requested to speak in that order. Proceed.
Yeah, like Honorable Mdhoni. She's really been waiting. Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, for adding me that time. So I was saying, it is sad that a student on a 2-hour flight from, actually 1.5 hours flight from Uganda, you know, takes a flight from Uganda, Kampala, and comes to Kenya or Rwanda. And when he gets to Kenya, he pays school fees at Kenyatta University or Nairobi University or the University of Nairobi as a student from United States would pay, as a student from the other places like Asia would pay. They are regarded as international students. You know, a person with the same skin color as we do have, a person that is about 1.5 hours distance. It is very sad. It is not something that we should be talking about at this time and era. And that is why I'm saying, Honorable Speaker, that from 2005 since the Pan-African Parliament had the inaugural Legislative Assembly, by now they would have made inroads. They would have made recommendations that are workable. And I think it's important for the member states to support the Pan-African Parliament, to empower them to come up with possible treaties that can make the recommendations of the Pan-African. They are merely recommendations. And even if they make recommendations for the students, it would really help, because as it is right now, Honorable Speaker, it is, the entire body is a toothless dog, per se. It is a body that just meets to share ideas and propose and then go home and possibly network. That is not how Africans should be thinking as we speak. Because we've come of age, we are a rich continent, we are a continent that can reason together. It pains me that we all leave Africa to go and do research. You know, our students leave Africa to do research in the United States, to do research in Asia, to do research in far, 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 far countries and continents. Why can't we get to a level where students from the United States of America, students from Asia, come to the University of Nairobi and do research, so that we can also become a research center? Because we do not want to reason together, and that is why we are here, Honorable Speaker. So, Honorable Speaker, I conclude by saying that Pan-African Parliament should be empowered. Pan-African Parliament should think outside the box, or even throw the box away and start thinking. There should be treaties that make recommendations by the Pan-African Parliament more binding, other than mere recommendations and suggestions. With those very many remarks, Honorable Speaker, I thank you for the additional time, and I beg to support the report. Thank you very much.
Irene Mayaka, nominated MP.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. And I also stand to support this report. And I'd like to make additional remarks just to enrich and also ensure that we are together from here, ensuring that our Pan-African parliamentarians representatives are working well. Honorable Speaker, I'm speaking from the background of being the Vice President of East Africa region for African Liberal Network on behalf of my political party. And this is one of the forums where we are able to also have discussions with other political parties, not only from East Africa, but Northern Africa, Southern Africa, Central Africa, and Eastern Africa. And one of the things that this has actually helped us, and it would really enrich the Pan-African Parliament, is that we've been able to bring to table and discuss issues that are directly affecting our countries. Case in point, Honorable Speaker, like right now in Sudan, we are having a crisis that is going on, and I agree with my colleagues who are saying that right now the Pan-African Parliament should have been recalled to go back and actually give its comments on this particular issue that is really affecting people. As of today, it's even been said that in Southern Sudan, we are having citizens from other countries being beaten up. And this is an issue that is really, really making Africa look bad. And we need to have our voice heard in it. Honorable Speaker.
Did you say the Republic of Sudan or South Sudan?
South Sudan, my apologies. Honorable Speaker, some of the issues that I would have loved to see from this report is, for example, the ongoing crisis in Ukraine and some of the effects that it has had in Africa. Because African countries have been some of the biggest beneficiaries of imports from Ukraine, like wheat and oil. And as a result of that, we are having foodstuffs in this country, and not only this country, but most African countries being extremely expensive. And this, for us, should be an actual wake-up call. As African countries, as our representatives in Pan-Africa, can they have discussions of how we can come up with solutions that can actually help us within Africa? For example, why do we have to import so much wheat all the way from Ukraine, and yet we have African countries that have good soils, that have good weather, that can actually do this right here at home? These are some of the wake-up calls that we need to start thinking as Africans. Can we find African solutions to African problems so that we don't have to go to the West or the East, and we can actually find solutions within ourselves. Mr. Speaker, the other day, our president and the president of South Africa did sign an agreement pact that allows Kenyans and South Africans to travel to each other's countries without visa for 90 days. What that has done, Honorable Speaker, is that it has enabled a lot of Kenyans and South Africans to travel from each other's country for tourism and trade. Instead of people going all the way to Dubai for holiday, people are now actually considering Cape Town or Mombasa or Diani for holidays. And these are some of the things that we should encourage. Kenya Airways right now has 4 flights on a daily basis going to Johannesburg and Cape Town. And the reason for this is because that we have enabled people to travel without too many stringent needs. Pan-African Parliament should be pushing for us to be able to have a free Africa travel so that more people can travel within different African countries without too many visa restrictions, because then you're able, free tariff, because then you're able to go to different countries and even see opportunities that you could actually get from there. Mr. Speaker, I've seen a lot of emphasis from the report in terms of what the Pan-African Parliament wants to do with women, but sadly to speak, I'm not seeing anything about youth. And we keep forgetting, Honorable Speaker, that the youth of this country and all other African countries are the leaders of tomorrow, if not today. If you're not having succession plans and engagements of young people across Africa together, then we're not opening that space enough for them. And Honorable Speaker, I'd just like to cite an example of what Christopher Haemba, who is the founder of Nova Pioneer in Kenya, has been able to do. Because we do have a similar structure of Nova Pioneer in South Africa and in Botswana. And what that has enabled the students to be able to do is to have exchange programs across these 3 countries. Our Kenyan boys and girls are able to go to these other countries and see what's going on there, and the other way around. And they're able to then see that there are things beyond just Kenya that they're able to learn, even though they're still doing the 844 system. So, Honorable Speaker, I just want to say that for our PAP, that they do, if they could, they should widen the scope of the things that they are looking at, and they also should be able to be very visible. We want to hear the voice of our Pan-African parliamentarians every time there's a crisis happening in Africa, in whatever country. We want to hear the voice of our Pan-African parliamentarians being on top of things in terms of trade, giving advice, and driving policy issues that actually can enable us to help Africa. And I just want to conclude by saying, Honorable Speaker, that as Africans, we should be proud of who we are. And we should always engage, as the chair of budget is always saying, that Africa is our business. It should be our business, not only in terms of exchange, in terms of cultural differences and trade, but also that we must also speak on behalf of Africa and encourage even the people from outside the other continents to be able to come and see Africa, to be able to trade with Africa, and not only consider us as a tourism attraction, but that as people who are extremely well educated, people who know the things that they're doing. But the only way that that can work for us is that if we can actually have a wake-up call and realize that we have so much potential within our continent that we need to just leverage on this and encourage each other. I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Irene Mayaka, I can't see the Honorable Dorothy Kiara. Where are you seated? Could you give Honorable Dorothy Kiara the mic? If you can track a card.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to contribute on this very, very important report. Mr. Speaker, it is worth noting that Africa belongs to us Africans. And the problems of Africa will be resolved by none other than ourselves. As I state that, Mr. Speaker, I want to strongly support this report that has been tabled this evening by Honorable Wanjiku Muya, Chair, Committee Regional Integration. Mr. Speaker, it is worth noting and appreciating that our country, Kenya, we have members who represent us in the Pan-African Parliament. Out of the 52 countries, close to 52 countries that sit in that parliament, our voices are there. Mr. Speaker, it's very, very key that we Africans appreciate ourselves first, and the only way we can be able to move forward is, one, to be accountable and transparent in whatever we do. Accountability is very key, and transparency is equally very key. I'm saying this, Mr. Speaker, because in most cases when people sit together, some people have hidden cans under the table. And this is the reason why when they sit in the Pan-African Parliament and they pass laws, they pass treaties, some of the people differ the same, simply because they don't want unity in Africa. Mr. Speaker, it is very, very key for us to know and note that the European countries, somehow they are united because they use one currency. They trade across countries like the United States of America. These people have a constitution that guides and governs them. But when we come to Africa, Mr. Speaker, because of the small issues that we normally tend with, the issues like we don't trust one another, the issues that some African countries are not comfortable because they feel they are lagging behind. Mr. Speaker, our strength will only be drawn by us getting united. Mr. Speaker, I want to underscore the fact that this African country is right now threatened because we don't have peace. And it is our responsibility as the African leaders to ensure that peace and stability is key in every other country. Mr. Speaker, it is very sad when we hear that the warring factions in Congo, warring factions in Sudan, the Pan-African Parliament sits down and gives orders that they require peace in those countries, and then they go back to their countries and nothing happens. Mr. Speaker, I want to strongly support this report of Honorable Wanjiku, and I want to urge the Honorable Member that they work very, very closely with those who are serving in the Pan-African Parliament so that they can both harmonize the issues touching on our region with the issues touching on the African continent. Mr. Speaker, it is also worth noting that the issues of women, whether in Kenya, whether in Uganda, women matters touch across board. And when we are talking about women, I take cognizance in the fact that some African countries still, they have not, and I say they have not, been able to integrate women and make them part of their governance system. I want to thank our Kenyan Parliament, because today, Mr. Speaker, we have quite a huge number of women serving in this Parliament, single-member constituency, and the women who serve at the county level. Mr. Speaker, it is up to us and those who sit in the Pan-African Parliament to ensure that the countries who have not embraced women leadership, they do so at the earliest opportunity. Mr. Speaker, as
Order.
I conclude,
Order. Who is this honorable member who crosses over, talks with Honorable Millie, crosses over, is pulled by Honorable Osoro? Could the honorable member do what we do in the House in terms of changing or crossing the aisles? You just go up to there and do the right thing.
okay, Mr. Speaker, thank you. And as I conclude, Mr. Speaker, I want to say Africa is a very rich country. Africa has a relatively very, very accommodative climate. And for this reason, we must not lose Africa to anyone. Mr. Speaker, it is important to know that the countries in the West will always want to see African countries fighting all the time and no peace, so that they come in and say they want to broker peace. Mr. Speaker, we cannot be sure that they are coming in is to broker peace or coming to colonize the African countries once again. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I want to support this very, very important motion brought to the House and say it is the time for us Africans to stand and be counted. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Mboko Milemba, MP for Mwaya.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Pan-African Parliament, as I congratulate the Honorable Member for bringing this particular report to the House, Pan-African Parliament was a great mind and great thinking by the leaders then, who envisaged that we should bring an African bloc in place to make resolutions that actually empower African independent states, especially when they are negotiating at the international front or making a push to realize any benefit or defend the rights, both economic, social, and other forms of rights of the people. Pan-African Parliament must be closely related to the history of Pan-Africanism itself, which had the traditional original leaders who fought for African independence, like Kwame Nkrumah, maybe Jomo Kenyatta and others as founder members. But this is a movement that had a very long history emanating from the black Americans who were in America, like W.W. Du Bois, and many others who fronted the idea that Africa must be a proud nation with proud countries and with independent mind, pushing their policy independently without influence of the Europeans. That particular time, Honorable Speaker, they were also inspired by the Eurocentric scholars who had defined Africa as a dark continent. The other day I saw one member of parliament speak about that. There was a historian by the name William Travaropa, who, when asked whether there was anything in Africa, he said, there's nothing in Africa, but for Travaropa it was just darkness. So when the first Pan-Africanists came up within the continent, their first business was to establish the independence of African states, which they indeed did. Now, they later on created the Organization of African Union, which unfortunately did not pick up very strongly. And for how long during those days when we had the A-level history, you would get this question with 50 marks, that OAU is as a dog that is sleeping without teeth to bite. Later on, the creation of the Pan-African Parliament was actually supposed to bring the African member states to a level of having a stronger negotiating voice with other continents and other powers not only limited to rights, which I've seen here as recommendations, but also economic decisions like trading rights, economic blocks, currency, and other things that would make the continent very, very strong. I think the advent and trials by the late Libyan leader to form the African Union was a very serious step to try and strengthen Pan-Africanism. I therefore welcome the Pan-African Parliament, but it has a lot to do in terms of making Africa to be a strong bloc. In this report somewhere, I realized that the mover had this feeling that to strengthen even this parliament, we possibly need to have the representatives who sit in the regional bloc like the East African Parliament, the one that is based in Dar es Salaam, Arusha, in Tanzania, whichever way, as the members who will be the ones who should go to the Pan-African government. That would completely lose the spirit of Pan-African Parliament as intended from the history of Pan-Africanism. This Pan-African Parliament is supposed to have representation from the member states. And if there are regional issues that need to be negotiated, then networking among the member states, like if the Eastern region, those member states in the East African community, or for economic matters, the economic body that we used to call ECOWAS, and West Africa could do the same through their own regional bodies. East Africa is actually PTA, I'm very sorry. Let me correct myself. But ECOWAS is for West Africa. So they would then network within their regional bodies so that they have their point and their drive firmly put in place. But let the representation come from each member state, because that is where now the Pan-African Parliament sits and is respected as a parliament sitting for African nations, not with regional representation, but member states representing the interests of Kenya, Tanzania, and other African states as they are. So there I would wish to really reiterate that it's very important that the representation is directly from the member states.
Order, Honorable Mboko. Honorable Muliungi, where did you come from to this side? You know, we can't give our new members, you know, habits other than those prescribed in the standing order. It is up to the other end. And you don't cross as you go. Proceed, Honorable Mboko.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for maintaining very, very good order within the House. You know, if we don't do that, then we shall lose the House in terms of its respect. So, Honorable Speaker, I was saying that the Pan-African Parliament has a lot of work to do. Number one, on the issue of labor, they have to legislate quickly to make sure that there is a cross-border movement and agreements that will allow free movement of labor from one state to another. And even go further to legislate within their different regions to allow free movement of labor without a lot of tariffs, including the work permits, which are making it difficult for labor to move, for instance, between Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and the neighboring states. And that is urgent because one big resource that the African nation still enjoys is human resource and labor. And that's why you will find that the multinational companies will always come to Africa because there's cheap labor. So the cheap labor is available for foreigners, but the cheap labor is not available for the African states themselves because there are too many barriers that limit on transfer of labor from one country to another. We cannot say to mention the issue of currency. In fact, this is where finally the rubber will hit the road. If it can legislate so that we start having a common currency between or among the African states, even if we were to begin with a few, then that is how we shall solve the problem of the dollar being as a good of serious scarcity like it is now. Honorable Speaker, today, yesterday, when the Prime Cabinet Secretary was addressing this Parliament, he severally talked about how our dollar stocks are diminishing, and is worried about the dollar stocks. It is because that the dollar is being used by a number of many states which are forming what is called the United States of America. And therefore, it's a very strong currency. So if they can bring a common currency which can actually be used as an African currency to negotiate loans using this particular currency, you can imagine the depreciation that the shilling has now had against the dollar. And that has made even us to pay almost double what we would have paid as foreign debt because of just the depreciation of the shilling that has accrued. So a common currency would be very, very strong for legislation of the Pan-African Parliament to strengthen the region that we call Africa. But then finally, even if, as I see the red light, the political legislation in this Parliament must be serious, so that we finally have leadership that are actually democratic and can respect constitutions of their own countries. And a country that is not respecting their own constitution can even be kicked out of this Parliament and the organization. Because what is hurting Africa most is the politics and the inability of these countries to respect their own constitution. When you look at what is now happening in northern Sudan,
is that the manner you wanted to conclude, Honorable Omboko? 1 minute to conclude.
So, Honorable Speaker, in my 1 minute, I must say that they must legislate on the politics of Africa so that democracy is upheld, the rights are upheld, and presidents and leaders respect their own constitution of their own countries. This will enable Africa to be peaceful, and therefore, once we are peaceful, we shall be able to be strong economically, strong socially, and even strong on international front when we negotiate for our interests. With those few remarks, I thank you, Honorable Speaker, for adding me that 1 minute. Thank you so much.
I want to interrupt debate for a short while to allow the majority leader lay a paper. Then Honorable Millie prepare as a former member of the Pan-African Parliament to make your contributions. The Honorable Majority Leader.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for your indulgence to lay the following paper on the table of the House today, Thursday, April 27, 2023. This is a national tax policy from the National Treasury and Economic Planning. Thank you, Honorable Speaker, and I also take this opportunity to welcome the Honorable Millie to the House at her usual time.
Thank you, Majority Leader. Honorable Millie Odhiambo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity, and I want to thank Honorable Ichung'wah for welcoming me at my usual time when we actually do serious business. I don't normally come when people do the AOB. This is only the Parliament of Kenya where we start with any other business and then the business starts later. So I know how to come at the right time as a member of Parliament who is a legislator, who is a lawyer by training. So I know this is a time when we do. But beyond that, Mr. Speaker, he was my former chair in the budget. So you must also know as a majority leader that the budget committee is sitting the whole day. So I'm a very committed member of the House. I've sat the whole day, but still had time to be here. But having said that, Mr. Speaker, let me take this opportunity to support the report by the head of the delegation of Pan-African Parliament, Honorable Mukami, on the proceedings of the first ordinary session of the 6th Parliament of Pan-African Parliament. Indeed, as the Speaker says, I'm a former member of the Pan-African Parliament, and so I understand quite a bit of how the proceedings go. Mr. Speaker, I've looked at the report, and I've seen that the report on the main plenary focuses a lot on the issue of conflict and unconstitutional regime changes in Africa and makes very serious recommendations, including early warning, and it is important, Mr. Speaker, as a continent to check on what bedevils us and why these changes are becoming very common, perhaps because we are slackening on the issue of governance. So maybe that is one of the things that we need to check as a continent. Mr. Speaker, one of the other things that I've actually seen them talking about is the issue of the need for continued election monitoring in countries where there's election monitoring. Mr. Speaker, courtesy of the Pan-African Parliament, I had opportunity to monitor election in a few of the countries. And one of the things I've noticed, which even creates those conflicts, is that at Africa, we are usually very late in terms of our reaction to changes. When, for instance, I'll give you an example, like the last time I was in Zambia, and when we did the election monitoring, everything looks okay, because the kind of questionnaire that you are given for monitoring will assess things like what time did people start the election, was there violence, did people have a chance to vote uninterrupted? But, Mr. Speaker, that is not how elections are rigged anymore in Africa. Elections are rigged digitally, and there is no system for monitoring digital stealing of elections. And until we reach a point in Africa where we are able to monitor digital rigging of elections, then we'll still have challenges as a continent. And therefore, I would want to urge the Pan-African Parliament that the next time that they're talking about this, let them look at how we can confront the issue of digitalization of elections, because that's where the problem is. The problem is no longer about whether people, I was also in Ghana, people vote very well. There's never any issue. But usually there's an issue post the election in transmission, especially in transmission of elections. So that is where we should be looking at. How do you monitor a digitized system of election? And I'm very disappointed even in development partners who are still living 40 years, 60 years ago when we didn't have digitized systems. And they look at the way people walked in, the way people got, voted. But how do you monitor how people, or rather how those results are transmitted? Mr. Speaker, I can actually tell you as a matter of fact that I won, and I won by a very huge margin. But still part of my election was rigged. I only left because I beat my opponent by a very big margin. So I didn't want to go on and on about it. I have written in my book, Rig or Be Rigged, that one of the things that is bedeviling us as a country and as a continent is that. And until we deal with it, then we can attend every conference and attend every meeting, and it will not solve our problems in Africa. Mr. Speaker, the other issue that I want to thank the Pan-African Parliament for dealing with is the issue of women's rights, and especially focusing on the Maputo Protocol. I know that Kenya is a party to the Maputo Protocol, but our challenge, because the Maputo Protocol talks very strongly on the issue of reproductive rights of women. Unfortunately, in this country, when especially our religious sector hear the word reproductive, you would actually think that reproductive is worse than the case that happened in Kilifi. That it's more sin to talk of reproductive, yet people are reproducing, including pastors. So I don't know why reproduction is a sin. I would want to encourage the religious leaders to know that reproduction is not a sin. When you hear us talking, so I'm actually bringing a bill called Family Reproductive Healthcare Bill. When you see it, don't be on the defensive.
Honorable Millie Odhiambo, did you forget that the speaker is your uncle?
Yeah. Thank you, my uncle, Mr. Speaker. But it is true. Everybody reproduces, including pastors. The only people who don't reproduce, I know, is in the Catholic Church, where people who have committed themselves to serve God, but some also sometimes sin is all over the world. So you even find people who have committed to serving the Lord sometimes are swayed to reproduce. And because of that, I would want to encourage that as a country, when we do finally bring that reproductive healthcare, family reproductive healthcare bill, let us look at it soberly, because we are having so many difficulties and challenges as women, and even as men. I've said it here before, that we have men suffering infertility and erectile issues, but we don't talk about them. In fact, my Kalenjin brothers are the ones who know. They have a term called kipka. Kipka means there are things that people don't talk about. There are things that are said in the bedroom and that. Yet actually, they are the things that affect us the most. So I'd want to say that I want to thank the Pan-African Parliament for raising this. Mr. Speaker, the only challenge that I'd want to say, which I saw in Pan-African Parliament, and one of the reasons I was not very persuaded to even go back, is me, I'm a person who is very output or results oriented. And Pan-African Parliament does not have a legislative authority. So what we do is we can say, let us have a model law, or the reports of Pan-African Parliament, even if you look at the one that is presented here, it comes more as a report of a conference or a workshop. But if it had legislative authority, like yesterday we were passing the 3 conventions relating to children. And Mr. Speaker, once we pass that here, it becomes binding on the country. But this report of Pan-African Parliament is more persuasive. It is not binding. So one of the things that I even raised when I was in Pan-African Parliament was that we need to give that parliament legislative authority. Let us see what European Parliament does, what other regional parliaments do. And as Africa, we will be saying we have problems when you have the African Union is still holding on to some residues of power. They don't want to let go of the legislative power to Pan-African Parliament. Let them let go that power to Pan-African Parliament so that we have an executive arm sitting at the AU, you have a legislative arm sitting in Midrand, and then you have now, because there are also, the suggestion here was also we have a criminal court in Africa that can deal with issues in Africa. But let us have that once we also have given the legislative arm teeth to bite. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to encourage Honorable Mukami as the head of delegation, I'm presuming you are. I would want to encourage, because of some of the challenges, I'm not going to say which I've seen here, that we can consult outside here, but you need to do an amendment to the standing orders so that as a delegation, you are recognized specifically and you can give your reports without the back and forth that I've seen here before. Otherwise, I do support and I thank you for even doing a better job than we did when we were there. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Mili. The Honorable Augustine Mwafrika, the MP for Oisambu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this glorious opportunity to add my voice in supporting this report. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that when I was in school, I remember we used to run that in Africa, when it comes to developed countries and developed countries, we used to run that in Africa we have only 2 developed countries. That time it used to be South Africa and Egypt. But today I'm told that they are like 5. The reason why I'm giving reference to this about developed countries is because Africa, with so many countries, is only 2 countries which are developed. Then I just wonder, when shall we be 10? When shall we be 20? And the reason why we should keep growing to those numbers is when African countries are stable, when there is peace. Mr. Speaker, the Pan-African Parliament, I would propose that they are supposed to be given tooth to bite, because there is a difference between a watchman who will watch thieves coming only to call the employer to inform that they are thieves. And there is that person who is supposed to enforce. This Pan-African Parliament, Mr. Speaker, is supposed to be given more power, probably even to summon those political leaders who are creating conflict and violence in African countries. Summon them. And we are sad, Mr. Speaker, because right now, we as Africans and as leaders, we are looking Southern Sudan desperately what is happening in Southern Sudan. What has been gained or has been gained around for the last 10 years in Southern Sudan, now it is going to the drain. It is very sad, Mr. Speaker. We know that if this Pan-African Parliament, if it is given more power, and we have confidence with it, if it can be given more power, it can be able to stop all the political conflicts within Africa as a continent. This
Honorable Mwafrika, do you need any information from the majority whip?
I don't need, but since he wants to raise a point of order,
you don't need,
he can be around probably.
Point of order.
Yes.
For a point of information, if you don't need the information,
yes,
it can't be given. So the question again is, do you need information from the majority whip or not?
I don't need.
Proceed.
The reason why, Mr. Speaker, I'm saying that this parliament, the Pan-African Parliament, was inaugurated in 2004 to promote democracy and human rights. So, Mr. Speaker, we have a lot of confidence in this court, and we want to say that the developed countries have been coming up with some conventions and treaties. If we give an example of the Rome Statute, which most of the developed countries are not a member, but they come on telling us, Africans, that this is good for us. But for them, they don't become members. This afternoon, Mr. Speaker, we dropped a motion about the convention and treaties. I wish, Mr. Speaker, if it had emanated from the Pan-African Court, because Pan-African Parliament, Mr. Speaker, because we know it could have considered very much on culture and what have you, which regards to Africans. So, Mr. Speaker, I wish to recommend that we have confidence in this Parliament, and we recommend that this Parliament be given more power, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, and I support.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to contribute on this important report, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the committee for a very good job they have done, because this is very important. Mr. Speaker, Pan-African Parliament needs a lot of support, because this is a very good platform whereby, as Africans, we need to be proud of our continent, Mr. Speaker. And this is whereby we need to discuss the issue affecting our continent, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I want to say that if you look what is happening in Africa, it needs a lot of coming together and discussing the issues affecting our continent, Mr. Speaker. For example, Mr. Speaker, if we talk of climate change, in our continent, Mr. Speaker, we are affected. And this is the time we need to come and discuss as a continent, how can we do to contribute to our climate? How can we do to avoid this global warming? And as this Pan-African Parliament, I think these are the issues which will be discussed in there, and we need to support them, Mr. Speaker. When you see if you look at what is happening about this Ukraine war, Mr. Speaker, as Africa, we are affected. And Mr. Speaker, we need to come up and sit down as Africa, as a continent, and discuss how can we come up with a solution and avoid some of these things which is happening in our continent. Mr. Speaker, when there is a war, you see the economy is affected, Mr. Speaker. But if we can see, because Africa, we are feeding the West, we are feeding other continents, but because we don't have that kind of unity, Mr. Speaker, that's why sometimes we are misused by the West, Mr. Speaker. So I want to say that, Mr. Speaker, it is a high time we need to support this Parliament, Mr. Speaker. When we come together and discuss and agree on the issue of travel, we open our borders, and our children, our youth, we allow them to travel without a visa. to travel to other countries to gain knowledge, some to do to further their studies without disturbance. Mr. Speaker, I remember 3 years ago, I was approached by one of my constituents who the daughter was wanted to go and further studies in South Africa. But they wanted to get a visa, and it was a challenge to them, Mr. Speaker. But if we come together and say as a continent, let's work together, let's open our boundaries, that will help our youth, and it's also help to promote education in our continent, Mr. Speaker. Technology has make the world to be to bring world to be a village, Mr. Speaker. And due to the technology, we have brains in Africa. Good doctors come from Africa, Mr. Speaker. And this is the high time. We need to bring them together. In this parliament, we discuss and pass some laws which will allow working environments. Someone to be coming from, if you come from Kenya, you go to South Africa, you don't need many documents to get employment. That will also contribute to the economy of this of Africa, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to take the opportunity and thank the committee and say I support. Thank you.
The Honorable Joshua Mwalio, the MP for Maseka.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to support the report of the committee and for the well done, for the work well done. I would like to say that we as Africans, we need this Pan-African Parliament because this is where we can air our views as a coordinate and be able to know how each country is faring on as far as their economy is doing and also the peace of the country. Africans' countries are very rich in knowledge and even in resources. And we need to pass laws that can be able to protect these resources from being shipponed from this country by foreigners. If you go to where gold is mined, we will find that the foreign countries and the foreign big companies are the ones that normally mine these gold and diamonds and the oil and the gas. While we as Africans, we are employed there as employees in those companies. We need to be able to come together, even if it is to form big companies as a block, bring our resources together, form a mining company that can be able to mine gas as a country. Maybe 2 to 3 countries comes together, form a big block, which will be able to do a big business, rather than leaving everything to be shipped to other countries. For example, if you go to Kwale, you will find that the titanium which is being mined there is not being mined by Kenyans. It's being mined by foreigners from Italy who are shipping everything to Italy, and they pay us whatever they want, the premium they want to pay. So we need this Pan-African Parliament to be able to make laws that empower our own Africans so that we can be able to trade. Number 2, we need to be talking together as Africans, as African countries. We need this parliament to pass laws that will enable our presidents to come together and speak with one voice and say we are brothers. Why should we fight because we are neighbors? Why should we have quarrels because we are neighbors? By so doing, we are taking back all the progress that we have been able to, the achievements that we have been able to make, we are taking them behind. So we need this Pan-African Parliament to continue making good laws for progress, for prosperity. We also need free cross borders. From here to Nigeria, I go there without passport, without visa rather. I just walk in and do a business. I buy goods there, bring together and sell. But now if you want to do even a business in Tanzania here, you have so many things that are required. So this Pan-African Parliament should pass laws that are attractive, that are favorable even to the business people. So that is what I want us to be able to do as Africans, because we are one. We are blacks. Majority, why are you laughing at me? Number three, what we need as a parliament is that the laws that they pass in that parliament should be respected, should be rejected by the states that form the Pan-African Parliament, so that they can be able to be fulfilled in their own in the way they are passed. You see, you can pass a law and then it will never come to be implemented. So we need some implementations of the good laws, and the bad laws, we leave them out. With those few remarks, I want to stop there so that the other members can be able to contribute. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The MP for Kisumu is the Honorable Shakil Shabir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I acknowledge and note the report on the Pan-African Parliament that has been tabled, and it has raised a lot of concerns and a lot of good points. One of the things that, as an African, and I'm not a black African, but I'm a brown African, as my friend says, is that Africa has vision since the early 20th century to be combined as the Pan-African states of Africa. Gaddafi tried, the Egyptian Abdel Nasser tried, Lumumba tried, Nkrumah tried. The vision is excellent. The implementation and to take it across to be effective is not. Vision without implementation is hallucination. So we're wondering, there is the one in Addis Ababa. We have the Pan-African Parliament. We have the African Union. We have the Pan-African Parliament. We have ECOWAS. We have so many others. I sometimes wonder, and I've been to the Pan-African Parliament, I was not a participant, but I watched them, and I wondered whether this was a talk shop, because they do not make laws, as my colleague just said. It's really more like a conference of people to come and talk, and then there is a biggest problem that they have there is the question between Francophone and Anglophone, and then the Spanish phone. Now, you know, Africans, when you're going to be split between Anglophone and Francophone and Spanish phone, that's irrelevant. They're all Africans and we've all been colonized. And the point of the African Union and the Pan-African Parliament is to bring parliamentarians together so that they can form a body of understanding, so that they can understand what Kenya is about. We can understand what Uganda is about, what Botswana is about, what Mauritania is about, what Southern Sudan is about. The very fact that we are sitting here today and we see Southern Sudan, which is fallen into disarray, and now the Sudan, what is called the Arabic Republic of Sudan. Then we have the Ethiopians who are watching, and we have then we have these players from the Arab states and Israel and others watching and seeing how Sudan is disintegrating. Yet I have not seen one comment from the Pan-African Parliament. I have not seen one such comment from the African Union. It is sad. You know, the Pan-African Parliament should now get its act together. The Pan-African Parliament should no longer be a group of parliamentarians, each who have sovereignty, and a group of parliamentarians who go and sit in South Africa for 2 weeks every set period. We want to see results. We want to see how the Pan-African Parliament is going to be able to help in certain areas. Maybe when we are talking about Pan-Africanism, the issue of the sea boundaries. Why do we have to go to other people when we have the Pan-African Parliament in the African Union to tell us where the boundary of Kenya and the boundary of Somalia cross? Why can't we discuss that? Why can't we go and talk about other issues, whether it is Sudanese, whether it's the Nile Treaty? The Nile Treaty, Mr. Chair, was not drawn up by us. It was the Europeans. And yet my constituency at this moment is flooded because we are unable to desilt our rivers. We are unable to make channels. We are unable to put together dams because it's against the Nile Treaty. I think those are the issues that the Pan-African Parliament must look at. I was shocked and horrified at one time. There was a group of people who called themselves African chiefs who went to meet Gaddafi. And among them was the biggest crook that we have seen called Patini. Now, when did Patini become an African chief? I never know.
Honorable Shabir.
Yes, sir.
The standing orders do not allow you to mention a person.
Okay, I withdraw.
Cannot defend himself.
I withdraw and apologize, but we did have somebody who definitely was not an African chief. But so the point that I'm making is we must not trivialize. We must not trivialize the fact that Africans want to get together. We must not trivialize the fact that common African unity is going to be the strength of Africa. We must not trivialize the fact that if we Africans get together, we are a force to reckon with. We must not trivialize the fact that why are there invisible boundaries? Why cannot I fly from here to Morocco without a visa? Why cannot I fly from here to somewhere else? We must also not trivialize the fact that we don't have a common currency between Kenya, Uganda, and other places. This is the sort of thing we must look at. We must look at the European Union, and as you see, Mr. Chair, Britain went out of the European Union, and you can see the economic state of affairs in Britain. So these are the facts, Mr. Speaker, sir, and we must try our best to accentuate the positive in respect of the Pan-African Parliament and the African unity.
Shakil Shabir, the Honorable Dr. Lillian Gogo, the MP for Rangwe.
Thank you so much, Honorable Speaker. I also rise to support this particular report, and I think this report, Honorable Speaker, has been much debated and ventilated upon by members, and I rise to call that the mover be called to reply.
Is it the mood of the House that the mover should be called upon to reply? Mover.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I want to thank all the members who have contributed on this motion, and I want to assure them that I have heard their sentiments, and I want to assure them that they are well represented in Pan-African Parliament. I wanted to confirm to the members from Machakos that in South Africa now the visas are free. You can go to South Africa without any visa. Honorable Speaker, I urge the House to adopt the report of Pan-African Parliament and I beg to reply. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you very much. For good reasons, the question on the motion will be put when the House next sits, and when the matter will be so scheduled by the House Business Committee for Business. But I'm very pleased with the debates made. I wish we could pick this, particularly the relevant committees and the mover, for some firm resolutions in terms of how we can improve the operations of the Pan-African Parliament. Order, honorable members. Honorable members, at the time being 7:00 p.m., this House stands adjourned until Tuesday, the 2nd day of May 2023 at 2:30 p.m.
Make your mealtime more magical. Buy any participating pack. Check under the cap to get